Once upon a time, there was an ape of no particular consequence. Then, somewhere around 70,000 years ago, something mysterious and magical happened. The big brains of Homo sapiens changed. We don't fully understand why or how, but we gained the power to imagine. We gained the power to tell stories. As best as we can tell, Homo sapiens is the only animal who can imagine what does not exist and then bring it into existence. A cat can imagine a mouse she can't see, but sapiens can imagine a rainbow-colored sperm whale appearing through a portal in the stratosphere. See? You just did it. I'm Jared Anderson, and I'm a professional, decent human being. That's what a chaplain and minister is functionally. I focus on the intersection of story and thriving, motivation and empowerment. In this Human Well podcast, we are going to discuss well-being and the sources that inspire it. Each brief episode will have two parts, a story and a principle. I will share a story, then discuss the principle of well-being that story invites us to reflect on. We'll have story time and learning time. I want to begin with a story about stories. Joseph Campbell famously discussed the hero's journey, and George Lucas famously put that hero in space. We'll come back to that. But first, we are going to break down the story of stories to its simplest form. Writer and educator John Gardner is credited as having expressed the idea there are only two plots in all of literature. You go on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. In a word, this story is disruption. I would tell my students the most powerful word in any language is normal. The word normal collapses the countless rules about how we should live and act and even think. And when we make God the author of normal, things get pretty intense. So our first story distills to this. A stranger comes to town and invites the hero on a journey. But what is the journey? The journey is to discover truth. And what is the most important truth? The most important truth is the truth about ourselves. The nemesis, our mentor tells us, is fear and avoidance. We are scared to hurt and reluctant to work. What stops us from being honest with ourselves? We are scared. Honesty requires two main things, courage and fortitude. We need the courage to allow anything to be true. And even more daunting, we need the strength, emotional and otherwise, to deal with the consequences of that truth. Someone else's challenge is funny. Our challenge is scary. I want to share two readings about honesty. Honesty is our most basic starting point. Honesty is proper relationship to reality. We can't make any progress if we can't be honest. If we lie to others knowing the truth, we're malicious. If we lie to ourselves, we are cowards. The uncomfortable truth is we are all malicious. We are all cowards. The redeeming truth is that if we are honest about this truth, we can do something about it. A key quest in life is to make the unconscious conscious, to name our demons so we can master them. Spoiler alert. The best relationship to truth is compassionate, curious acceptance. Compassionate, curious acceptance is always the answer. Our two readings will be from The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, a favorite from my childhood, and Consolations by David Whye, both about honesty. In The Sword of Shannara, for those who aren't familiar, Alanon is the wise druid mentor, and Shea Omsford is the hero. And the quest is for the Sword of Shannara. And all the Sword of Shannara does is tell the truth. It just tells the truth. This is the moment where he first touches the sword. Whye's mind seemed to explode within him, and he was paralyzed by what he saw. He struggled wildly for his grasp of the vision of self that had always sustained him, for what had been his hold on sanity, fighting to shield himself from the awesome view of his inner nakedness and the weakness of the thing he was compelled to recognize as himself. Then the force of the current seemed to diminish slightly. Whye forced his eyes open, avoiding for an instant the inner vision. Before him was the upright sword ablaze with a blinding white light that surged downward from the blade to the pommel. Beyond it, he could see Panamam and Keltsit standing motionless, their gaze fixed upon him. Then the eyes of the giant troll shifted slightly, centering on the sword. There was a strange understanding and urgency in the gesture, and as Whye looked back to the sword of Shannara, its light seemed to pulsate feverishly. There was a sense of impatience about its movement, as it strained to advance from the blade into his body, and was somehow thwarted in its efforts. For a moment more, the Valman struggled against this advance, then his eyes closed and the inner vision returned. The first shock of revelation was past him now, and he made an effort to understand what was happening. He concentrated on the images of Whye Omsford, immersing himself completely in the thoughts, emotions, judgments, and motivations that made up this character that was both alien and familiar. The images cleared with frightening sharpness, and abruptly he saw another side to himself, a side he had never been able to recognize, or perhaps had simply refused to accept. It revealed itself in an endless line of events, all caricatures of the memories he had believed in so strongly. Here was an accounting of every hurt he had caused to others, every petty jealousy he had felt, his deep-seated prejudices, his deliberate half-truths, his self-pity, his fears, all that was dark and hidden within himself. Here was the Whye Omsford who had fled the Vale not to save and protect family and friends, but in fear of his own life, seeking any excuse for his panic. The Whye Omsford who had selfishly allowed Flick to share his nightmare and thereby ease the pain of it. Here was the Valman who had sneered at and belittled the moral code of Panamon Creole, while at the same time allowing the thief to risk his own life to save Whye's. And here, the images went on endlessly. Whye Omsford recoiled in horror from what he was seeing. He could not accept it. He could never accept it. Yet, drawing from some inner well of strength and understanding, his mind opened receptively to the images, expanding outward to embrace them, persuading him, or perhaps forcing him, to admit the reality of what he had been shown. He could not sensibly deny this other side of his character. Like the limited image of the person he had always believed himself to be, this was only part of the real Whye Omsford. But it was indeed a part, however difficult he found it to accept. But he had to accept it. It was the truth. And all of us need to embrace that truth. The second reading will be from one of my very favorite books, Consolations, which is by David Whyte and has themes and reflections on different principles. And I will read about honesty. Honesty is reached through the doorway of grief and loss. Where we cannot go in our mind, our memory, or our body is where we cannot be straight with another, with the world, or with ourself. The fear of loss in one form or another is the motivator behind all conscious and unconscious dishonesties. All of us are afraid of loss in all its forms. All of us at times are haunted or overwhelmed by the possibility of a disappearance, and all of us therefore are one short step away from dishonesty. Every human being dwells intimately close to a door of revelation they are afraid to pass through. Honesty lies in understanding our close and necessary relationship with not wanting to hear the truth. The ability to speak the truth is as much the ability to describe what it is like to stand in trepidation at this door as it is to actually go through it and become that beautifully honest spiritual warrior equal to all circumstances we would like to become. Honesty is not the revealing of some foundational truth that gives us power over life or another or even the self, but a robust incarnation into the unknown unfolding vulnerability of existence, where we acknowledge how powerless we feel, how little we actually know, how afraid we are of not knowing, and how astonished we are by the generous measure of loss that is conferred upon even the most average life. Let me say that again. Honesty is not the revealing of some foundational truth that gives us power over life or another or even the self, but a robust incarnation into the unknown unfolding vulnerability of existence. Honesty is grounded in humility and indeed in humiliation, and in admitting exactly where we are powerless. Honesty is grounded in humility and indeed in humiliation, and in admitting exactly where we are powerless. Honesty is not found in revealing the truth, but in understanding how deeply afraid of it we are. To become honest is, in effect, to become fully and robustly incarnated into powerlessness. Honesty allows us to live with not knowing. Honesty allows us to live with not knowing. We do not know the full story. We do not know where we are in the story. We do not know who is at fault or who will carry the blame in the end. Honesty is not a weapon to keep loss and heartbreak at bay. Honesty is the outer diagnostic of our ability to come to ground in reality, and the hardest attainable ground of all, the place where we actually dwell, the living, breathing frontier where there is no realistic choice between gain and loss. Now for the science. I'd like to address the topics of confirmation bias, backfire effect, and self-compassion and acceptance. First, a note about truth. Some listeners will hear the influence of Yuval Harari's book Sapiens in this episode, and I highly recommend his work. 3 words that help us understand the range of reality are objective, subjective, and a less known term, intersubjective. Objective truth impacts us whether or not we believe. Subjective reality impacts us only because we believe. Intersubjective reality impacts us because enough of us believe. So for example, objective reality, you don't need to understand biochemistry or carcinogens to benefit from nutrients in food or get cancer. Too bad. Subjective reality, our beliefs impact our bodies and health. Stress and anxiety are powerful forces that actually change our body and impact our health, as are peace, acceptance, and hope. Ironically, one of the healthiest things we can do with our mind is nothing. I work to meditate 50 minutes a day. Intersubjective reality, this is literally civilization. Everything from government to human rights to money to religion is real only because enough people believe it is real. This is the key power of Homo sapiens. We can imagine what is not real, then make it real in the real world. Now on to confirmation bias and backfire effect. One of my misguided thoughts was the more intelligent we are, the better we discern truth. Problem is, the more intelligent we are, the better we can hide from truth. Confirmation bias refers to the fact that when we seek out information, we don't seek out the truth. When we seek out new information, we seek out information that agrees with what we already think and already believe. So the sobering paradox is the smarter we are, the more effectively we can avoid connection and growth. Backfire effect is even more of a mind job. Confirmation bias addresses how we seek out new information. Backfire effect addresses how we respond to new information that we aren't seeking. When we are already convinced by an idea, we seek out information that confirms that idea. When we are convinced by an idea, the more powerful opposing evidence is, the more we are convinced by our original idea. Yes, this is one of the most depressing insights I've learned about social science. How it works is this. When we are committed to what we are already committed to, the stronger opposition is, the more our brains have to work to counter that new information. That brain effort, like spinning our tires while we're in neutral, creates energy, and the more powerful the energy, the more convinced we are. Or I guess it's while the brakes are on and we like rev our engines. So the more convincing challenging information is, the more convinced we are that we are right. The more compelling the counter evidence is, the more it backfires. And this is why the secret is to be humble and open and curious. So in conclusion, please practice curious, compassionate acceptance. When you are confronted with a challenging idea, either from outside or within yourself, name your feelings. Ask yourself what those feelings are trying to tell you. Sit with them gently. See what happens. It will be a grand adventure. Thank you for spending this time together. Remember to show up, be well, and human better.